In the frozen vastness of imperial Russia, where the aurora borealis painted the winter sky in shades of emerald and gold, a German princess transformed herself into history's most formidable empress through a deadly combination of brilliant intellect and ruthless ambition. Catherine II, who would earn the title the Great through conquest and cunning, carried within her palace walls secrets so explosive they could have toppled dynasties, secrets of murder, passion, and political machinations that would make Machiavelli himself recoil in admiration and terror. Are you ready to uncover the dark truth behind history's most powerful woman? Like this video, share it with fellow history lovers, and subscribe now with the notification bell on to discover the shocking secrets that Catherine the Great took to her grave, secrets that could have destroyed empires and changed the course of world history forever. Born Sophie Friederike Augusta von Anhalt-Zerbst-Dornburg on May 2, 1729, in the minor Prussian town of Stettin, she entered a world that offered no hint of the imperial crown that would one day rest upon her head. Her father, Prince Christian August, commanded little more than a crumbling castle and depleted treasury, while her mother, Princess Johanna Elizabeth, possessed the kind of social ambition that burned like winter fire, destructive in its intensity and impossible to extinguish. The child who would become Catherine the Great learned her first lessons in survival not from tutors, but from the cold reality of minor nobility, where every conversation was a negotiation and every smile concealed a blade. Young Sophie watched her mother navigate the treacherous waters of Germanic court politics with the precision of a chess master, noting how information became currency and secrets transformed into weapons more deadly than cannons or cavalry charges. When the summons came from Empress Elizabeth of Russia in 1744, inviting the 14-year-old princess to St. Petersburg as a potential bride for the heir apparent, Grand Duke Peter, Sophie understood immediately that she was being offered not just a husband, but an empire. The journey across the frozen steppes to the glittering capital represented more than a change of geography. It was a metamorphosis that would strip away every vestige of her German identity and forge her into something entirely new. The winter palace that greeted her arrival stood like a monument to absolute power, its Baroque facades concealing corridors where whispered conspiracies echoed off gilded walls and where a careless word could mean exile to Siberia or worse. Sophie observed everything with the intensity of a spy, cataloging the relationships between courtiers, memorizing the genealogies of noble families, and most importantly, studying the weaknesses of the man she was destined to marry. Grand Duke Peter III proved to be a gift beyond her wildest calculations, a weak-minded buffoon who preferred playing with toy soldiers to governing an empire whose admiration for Frederick the Great of Prussia bordered on treason, and whose capacity for alienating potential allies seemed limitless. As she underwent conversion to Orthodox Christianity and adopted the name Catherine, she watched her future husband with the cold assessment of a hunter studying wounded prey. Their wedding in 1745 was a spectacle of imperial grandeur, but the marriage itself became a masterclass in emotional manipulation and strategic patience. Peter's failures as a husband, his childish obsessions, his probable impotence, his inability to consummate their union for years, provided Catherine with both opportunity and justification for the dangerous game she was about to begin. If he could not fulfill his duties as a man, she would assume his responsibilities as a ruler. The court of Empress Elizabeth seethed with sexual intrigue and political conspiracy, creating an environment where Catherine's intelligence and adaptability could flourish. She learned to speak Russian with such fluency that common people believed she had been born on the Volga, studied Orthodox theology until she could debate with bishops, and most dangerously of all, began cultivating relationships with the powerful men who truly controlled the empire. Her first lover, Sergei Saltykov, was chosen not for romantic reasons, but for political necessity. The handsome chamberlain possessed the bloodline and court connections that could protect her from enemies while providing the heir that Peter seemed incapable of siring. When Paul was born in 1754, officially recognized as Peter's son, Catherine had secured her position in the succession while creating the first of many secrets that would shadow her reign. Count Stanisław Poniatowski, her Polish lover who would later become king of his nation through her influence, represented a different kind of calculation. Their passionate affair, conducted under the very nose of Empress Elizabeth's court, demonstrated Catherine's growing confidence in managing multiple dangerous relationships simultaneously. Each liaison was a thread in an increasingly complex web that she wove around the Russian nobility, binding them to her through desire, obligation, and fear. The death of Empress Elizabeth in January 1762 elevated the incompetent Peter to the throne as Peter III, but his reign would prove to be one of history's most catastrophic 6 months of imperial rule. His immediate reversal of Russian foreign policy, withdrawing from the 7 Years' War just as victory seemed within reach, outraged the military establishment that Catherine had been carefully cultivating for nearly 2 decades. Peter's open contempt for Russian Orthodox traditions, his plans to dismantle the Church's power, and his obvious intention to drag Russia into war against Denmark on behalf of his beloved Holstein created a perfect storm of opposition. But it was his personal treatment of Catherine, his public humiliations, his threats of divorce and imprisonment, his flaunting of his mistress Elizabeth Vorontsova, that transformed political discontent into revolutionary fervor. The conspiracy that brought Catherine to power was orchestrated with a precision that would have impressed the most seasoned military strategists. Gregory Orlov, her current lover and the father of her illegitimate son Alexei, commanded the loyalty of the Guards Regiment stationed in St. Petersburg. His brothers and their network of officers provided the military muscle, while Catherine supplied the political legitimacy and the iron will necessary to execute the most audacious coup in Russian history. On the morning of July 9, 1762, Catherine awoke not as an empress, but as a woman whose life hung by the thinnest of threads. Peter had spent the night at his estate outside the capital, leaving her free to implement the plan that had been months in the making. Dressed in a simple black dress that concealed her royal identity, she was smuggled out of the palace and driven to the barracks of the Izmailovsky regiment, where loyal officers were waiting to proclaim her the rightful ruler of Russia. The scene that unfolded in those barracks became the stuff of legend, a foreign-born woman speaking in fluent Russian, appealing to soldiers' patriotism while promising to restore their nation's honor and Orthodox faith. Her performance was flawless, combining genuine emotion with calculated rhetoric, and within hours she had secured the allegiance of the most powerful military units in the empire. The march to the Winter Palace revealed Catherine's true genius for political theater. Rather than skulking through back streets like a typical conspirator, she chose to parade through the center of St. Petersburg in full imperial regalia, accompanied by thousands of cheering soldiers and citizens who saw in her the salvation of Russian greatness. By afternoon, she was Empress Catherine II, and Peter III had become a deposed monarch whose life could be measured in days rather than years. Peter's death, 8 days later in the custody of Alexei Orlov at Ropsha Palace, remains one of history's most convenient mysteries. The official cause, hemorrhoidal colic, fooled no one, but the alternative explanations were too dangerous to voice aloud. Whether Catherine ordered his murder, merely allowed it to happen, or remained genuinely ignorant of the deed mattered less than the result: the removal of the only person whose existence threatened her legitimacy. The first years of her reign established the pattern that would define Catherine's rule. Brilliant policy initiatives shadowed by dark whispers about the methods used to implement them. Her nakaz, or instruction, a comprehensive legal code influenced by Enlightenment philosophy, positioned Russia as Europe's most progressive empire while simultaneously strengthening autocratic power. She corresponded with Voltaire and Diderot, presenting herself as the enlightened despot who would modernize Russian society through reason and benevolence. Yet beneath this veneer of philosophical governance lay the harsh realities of maintaining absolute power in a nation where rebellion lurked in every province. The Pugachev uprising of 1773-1775, led by a Cossack who claimed to be the murdered Peter III, revealed how precarious her position truly was. The revolt's suppression required not just military force, but a campaign of terror that left thousands dead and entire regions devastated. Catherine's response to this challenge demonstrated both her political brilliance and her capacity for ruthless action. She traveled personally to the affected regions, combining displays of imperial mercy with systematic elimination of rebel leaders. Pugachev himself was brought to Moscow in an iron cage and executed with a brutality designed to discourage future uprisings, while Catherine proclaimed amnesty for his followers and implemented reforms that addressed their legitimate grievances. Her private life continued to scandalize Europe while providing endless ammunition for her enemies. The succession of favorites who shared her bed, Gregory Orlov, Grigory Potemkin, and a parade of younger men whose careers depended on their ability to satisfy an empress's appetites, created a parallel government of influence and patronage that operated beyond traditional channels of authority. Potemkin represented the culmination of this dangerous game, combining genuine military and administrative talent with a personal relationship so intense that rumors suggested they had secretly married. Their correspondence reveals a partnership that transcended mere physical attraction, encompassing shared visions of Russian expansion and cultural transformation that would reshape the empire's destiny. Yet even this deepest of connections carried within it the seeds of potential destruction, as Potemkin's independent power base made him both indispensable ally and potential rival. The conquest of the Crimean Peninsula and the expansion into the Black Sea region became Catherine's greatest triumph and most dangerous gamble. The wars against the Ottoman Empire required massive expenditures of blood and treasure while risking intervention by other European powers who feared Russian expansion. Yet success would transform Russia into a true great power, while failure could trigger internal revolt and foreign invasion. Potemkin's management of these southern campaigns revealed the Empress's genius for delegation and her willingness to trust subordinates with enormous independent authority. The legendary Potemkin villages, whether real or mythical, symbolize the dangerous relationship between truth and propaganda in Catherine's empire, where impressive facades often concealed harsh realities, but where the facades themselves became a form of reality through sheer force of imperial will. Her cultural policies created another layer of secrets and contradictions that defined her reign. While proclaiming herself a patron of Enlightenment values, she maintained serfdom in its most brutal forms and expanded its reach into newly conquered territories. Her collection of Western European art and philosophy coexisted with a legal system that treated the majority of her subjects as property to be bought, sold, and punished at their master's discretion. The Hermitage Museum, begun during her reign, became both a symbol of Russian cultural sophistication and a repository of secrets about the empire's true financial condition. The vast sums spent on acquiring masterpieces from across Europe drained treasury resources that might have been used for infrastructure or social reform, yet the collection served to legitimize Russian claims to European respectability and cultural leadership. Her correspondence with philosophers like Voltaire and Diderot created an elaborate fiction of enlightened governance that impressed Western intellectuals while concealing the autocratic realities of Russian political life. These letters, carefully crafted for eventual publication, presented Catherine as the ideal embodiment of reason applied to government, while omitting any reference to the methods actually used to maintain order across her vast empire. The French Revolution created the greatest crisis of Catherine's later reign, forcing her to choose between her proclaimed Enlightenment values and her practical need to preserve autocratic authority. Her initial sympathy for revolutionary ideals rapidly transformed into horror as events in Paris spiraled toward regicide and republican government. The execution of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette struck at the foundations of legitimate monarchy everywhere, creating existential threats that required desperate measures to counter. Catherine's response revealed both her political pragmatism and her capacity for betraying former allies when necessity demanded. She severed relations with former philosophe correspondence, implemented harsh censorship of Western ideas, and began the persecution of Russian intellectuals who had embraced Enlightenment concepts too enthusiastically. The woman who had once proclaimed herself reason's champion became its enemy when reason threatened the throne she had seized through force and maintained through fear. Her relationship with her son Paul deteriorated into a cold war of succession that poisoned the final years of her reign. Paul's knowledge of the circumstances surrounding his father's death, combined with his resentment over his mother's lovers and policies, created a dangerous dynamic where the heir apparent represented a potential focal point for opposition to the Empress's rule. Catherine's attempts to bypass Paul in favor of her grandson Alexander reflected both maternal love and political calculation, as she recognized that her son's accession would likely mean the reversal of everything she had accomplished. The mysterious circumstances surrounding Catherine's own death on November 17, 1796, provided a fitting conclusion to a reign defined by secrets and speculation. The official cause, stroke, seemed plausible for a 67-year-old woman who had endured decades of enormous stress, but rumors of poison or other forms of violence reflected the atmosphere of suspicion that had surrounded her from the moment she seized power 34 years earlier. Paul's immediate reversal of his mother's policies upon ascending the throne suggested that Catherine's fears about succession had been entirely justified. His release of political prisoners, his reconciliation with European monarchs, and his attempts to limit noble privileges demonstrated that the empire she had built rested on personal authority rather than institutional foundations. Her greatest secrets died with her, leaving historians to speculate about the true extent of her involvement in her husband's murder and the real nature of her relationships with the men who had shaped Russian destiny. The legends that emerged after Catherine's death often focused on salacious details about her private life while ignoring the genuine achievements of her reign. The expansion of Russian territory by some 200,000 square miles, the founding of cities like Odessa and Sevastopol, and the cultural transformation that brought European civilization to the Russian steppes represented accomplishments that dwarfed the sexual scandals that fascinated gossip-mongers. Yet the dangerous secrets she carried to her grave continued to influence Russian political culture long after her death. The precedent of successful coup against legitimate authority, the tradition of favorites exercising unofficial power, and the expectation that autocratic rule could coexist with Enlightenment rhetoric became permanent features of imperial governance that would persist until the dynasty's final collapse in 1917. Modern scholarship has begun to penetrate some of the mysteries that surrounded Catherine's reign, using newly opened archives to reconstruct the decision-making processes that shaped Russian policy. These investigations reveal an empress whose political calculations were even more complex and far-sighted than her contemporaries realized, but they also confirm that her success required a willingness to employ methods that would have horrified the philosophe who celebrated her enlightened governance. Her influence on subsequent Russian history extended far beyond the territories she conquered or the institutions she created. The image of the strong female ruler who could dominate masculine political environments while maintaining her essential femininity became a template that would inspire and terrify future generations of Russian women who sought power in their own right. Catherine's legacy reminds us that historical greatness often requires the ability to compartmentalize moral considerations and focus relentlessly on practical results. Her reign demonstrates that even the most enlightened rhetoric can coexist with the darkest practices, and that the pursuit of national greatness sometimes demands personal compromises that would destroy lesser individuals. Today, as we grapple with questions about the relationship between personal morality and public effectiveness, Catherine's example remains disturbingly relevant. She proved that transformational leadership could emerge from the most unlikely circumstances and achieve remarkable results through methods that violated every principle of legitimate governance. Yet her success came at costs that continue to influence Russian political culture more than 2 centuries after her death. In the end, Catherine the Great achieved immortality not through the territories she conquered or the cultural institutions she founded, but through the sheer audacity of her transformation from minor German princess to Russian empress. Her dangerous secrets died with her, but the legend of the foreign woman who became more Russian than Russians themselves continues to fascinate and inspire those who understand that true power requires the courage to embrace whatever methods necessity demands, regardless of the moral price such choices exact from those bold enough to pay it.